I don't normally come out here to work in the car at lunchtime because I've only got an hour, and by the time I get started, it's time to go back in again. But I've had an idea, and I want to see if it'll work, and it'll just bug me unless I give it a try. And I should be able to sort this out within an hour. Now, one of my frustrations of the weekend was that I lost so much time on what should have been simple jobs, and one of them was this, replacing the power steering gator. So that fits onto the end of the steering rack, and there the narrow end clamps on here to the tie rod, and that it keeps all the gunk and muck out of the end of the piston, the steering rack piston. To replace it should be relatively simple. Just undo your tie rod end, undo your locking nut, pop the new one on, job's a good one. But the locking nut is fused in place, and the normal sort of recesses that are on the tie rod that you put a wrench on to adjust the tracking on the car, they're worn off it too, which suggests this has been fused on here with a while. I spent hours and hours working on this, and just for your info, the way this works is normally you undo the locking nut, then you get your wrench on the tie rod end and you twist that around. That's a ball bearing, so basically it threads in and out of the tie rod end here, and that threading adjusts the angle of the steering, and that's how you get your alignment sorted. But with this locked in place, I can't either track it properly, nor can I replace the boot. So I've spent hours and hours using everything I can think of, impact wrenches and all sorts of stuff to try and get it off. And then it just occurred to me today, let me have a look in my little trusty box of old bits, and sure enough I found an exact stainless steel bolt that will fit on there, the exact same size. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cut it off. I'm just doing the last bit by hand because the last thing I want to do is damage the tie rod itself. So just by doing the last bit by hand, I can be a bit more precise and a bit gentle with it. But the vast majority of the work has already been done by the grinder. This should only take a few minutes. Actually, I tell a lie. It's more like a few seconds. Alright, that should be it. Oops. So rather than try and crack the nut right off, just by cutting it I was able to open it out, and that is that. Why didn't I think of this last weekend? I've said this before many times, that, look at that, that's it. But very often when you hit a frustration in a job, the easiest thing to do, well, the temptation is to persevere and keep chugging away at it, but actually the easiest thing to do sometimes is to walk away. And that's actually what I did at the weekend. I didn't do any work at all on the car on Sunday because I was so pissed off with the gearbox and this, that I just decided, you know what, I need a break from it. And that's why I came out today, because I don't know where my brain went, I know how to do this, and sure enough, it did. And that, just as the rain closes in, is that's my power steering gator in. I'll just zoom in on it there, and that's all buttoned down. On the left hand side I used a CV boot clamp, but on the other side, because the diameter of the tie rod is so small, I just use a regular hose clamp. But this isn't a rotating part, so this will do the job just fine. It'll keep all the muck and dirt out, which is what I needed to do. I've got a new sort of locking nut here. I counted this before I took it off, so there were 20 threads. So I put my my tie rod end, screwed it back in 20 threads worth, and then locked it in position. And then I've got a new lock nut here in the end, so that should pretty much all be buttoned down and where it needs to be. The frustration with that job was that it was in my order of things to do. That was number one, because this is where the ABS module lives, And so if there's no point putting this in because it would block access to the back of the engine bay. And the other job I need to do down the same end of the engine is that little bolt there, right in the center of the screen. That is one of the hoses, or one of the bolts that holds in the power steering hose. This power steering hose here, that is, as you can kind of see it there, is all oily and greasy, that one. So that has to come out of the power steering pump. It goes down through the back of the engine by the power steering rack, and then behind the heat shield, and then over here to the steering box, which is in there, and you can kind of see where it's been unbolted. So that is loose and ready to come out, but I can't take that out until I loosen the hose all the way along. It's a steel brake line, so that bolt needs to be undone. That's the next job to do. That I might do tomorrow at lunchtime, because right now I've got 20 minutes of my lunch break left. I've done a job. I'm happy. It's raining on me. I'll call that a win and go get some grub.
Right, so what you were looking at here, this is the steering box, and this right here is the hydraulic line that feeds high pressure into the steering box, and that's the return line. And that one, as you can see, is come out. That's why there's a little space there. So that one came out easily, but this one, which is trickier to get to, and just to give you an idea, I'm going to back it out now and show you where this is within the car. That's sort of buried in there by really at the back of the engine. There's sort of lit in there. So there's the knot of hoses and cable and lines in there. So that's it from this angle. And if I zoom back out again, you can kind of see how tricky and awkward all that is to access. So the difficulty that I have is I can't get a good enough angle on that line to pull it out, and it seems to have fused itself into the steering box. And nothing else can happen today until that's out, because of where it's fed, all the access is down the back of the engine, and I can't put anything else in there until that's out. So I'm starting to think that rather than wasting any more time trying to coax that out, I need to drop the subframe. There's only, I think, 6 bolts holding it on, and they're reasonably easy to access. Where are they? There they are. There's a couple there at the back, and then there's one here. So they're reasonably easy to access. So I think I might get the trolley jack underneath it, support it up, undo the bolts, drop it down, and that'll give me a lot better access, not only to get the hose out, but also to feed it all back in really tastily and make sure it doesn't snag on anything. I think that's going to be my plan today. I'm just about at the end of a very unsatisfactory day. I thought I was at that point where I was starting to make steps towards finishing the car, but in actuality, I'm still taking it apart. I'm still going the opposite way. This is the front subframe. It's had to come out of the car because I was unable to get this the power steering line, the high pressure side, out of the steering box. So the low pressure line popped out fine. The high pressure one was a nightmare. So that I've snapped it off now. The hose is over here. So I've cracked off the end of it. So I'm gonna try and get a vice grips around that, see if I can get that off. At the other end of it, I also have the power steering pump off. It is here. And the reason I've done that again is to try and get better access to, well, to get better access to that nut there that's holding it on, that locking nut, and all, the hose. And also I have to sort of put an adapter and things on it in order to relocate the power steering reservoir, the fluid reservoir. So it's just easy to do when it's off the car. And that's why I've taken the headlamps out as well. One, to access the pump on this side, and also to take off the auxiliary belt. And then on this side I took out the headlamp just because this is where I'm going to mount the auxiliary, the power steering reservoir. So it's just easy to get out of the way here. And here's the aux belt. And I didn't notice this before, but it's actually starting to fray. So it's quite an old and tired belt. So I'm still diagnosing, I'm still disassembling, I'm still going backwards. It's a bit frustrating, but that's old cars for you. And in a perverse way, you know, I've quite enjoyed taking the subframe. I've never taken the subframe of a car before, And yeah, it's not an easy job, but like all of these things, it's not impossible either. So, bit of a frustrating day, but hopefully we can start making steps forward very soon. I'm convinced, because the power steering system has overheated so many times, that's part of the reason why everything is seized on the system. There's a little, I think it's pressure sensor on the original power steering hose that, again, I can't get off, and the other end of the power steering hose that fits into the pump, which I had to take off. Again, I'm swinging out of this thing with all my might, and I can't get it open. So yeah, everything is just welded together almost. It's impossible to open anything. So my jobs for tomorrow are basically to finish this off, get these open, get that off, and try not to damage it. I need to order an auxiliary belt, and I'm probably going to change the clutch. That I can do without the gearbox, and it is actually, I'm not going to say it. It should be a relatively straightforward job, but it'll be good to have that done, and it'll be one less thing to worry about when the box arrives and when the proper power steering hose arrives. So I'll be able to make good progress when all the final bits do finally turn up. I say this all the time, you know, getting everything diagnosed, getting it all taken apart, that's the slow and cumbersome bit. Once you've got it all apart, it actually goes back relatively well, because you have everything you need to put it back together, and you know how it goes together. Access to certain nuts and bolts can be tricky, but that's part and parcel of any car builds. So yeah, I'll do a little bit tomorrow, but not much. Today's been a long day, much longer than I thought it was going to be. The original plan was just to change the hose, and that was going to be it, and I'd be in by lunchtime, and here we are at whatever time, nearly 7 o'clock, and I'm still out here. But that's cars, and that's why I bought it. Give me something to do. Popped open the door of the Fiesta this morning, and I had the realization that of all the major controls, throttle, brake, clutch, steering, gear lever and handbrake, only the handbrake works. Everything else is completely disconnected and free and easy. Oh look, it rights itself. That's a new one on me. I was doing some research last night, and I came to the rather depressing conclusion that I don't think I'll have any choice but to eat the £220 that Ford charges for that power steering hose. There are no aftermarket alternatives. The only one I saw that proclaims to be is the one that I'd bought, but it doesn't fit. It's completely wrong for it. So that's going to have to go back. I'm going to have to get the Ford one for £222. But it's the right thing to do for the car. You know, it has to happen. Now, it's certainly not doing my budget any favors, but I'm still well within the parameters of being able to sell the car for a wee profit. But as you can tell from this project, you know, this was never about squeezing every penny I could out of the car. It's more a pleasure project. It's more something to do during lockdown to keep me sane, get me out of the house. It's more about saving a car that would otherwise probably not be saved. So from that point of view, I'm reasonably okay with things. I'm enjoying the project, and I'm enjoying the problem-solving aspect of it. I could do at this point now without spending any more money. I've sort of had enough of that. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the peripheral jobs. I now have to wait for that hose along with my gearbox to come in. So today what I'm going to do is do my peripheral jobs, which is just the little odds and sods that need doing, like putting in the air filter. And the other thing I'm going to do today is I'm going to pop the clutch in, because that is on the engine blocks, on the flywheel. So that's something that I can do without needing my gearbox. And it'll just hurry things along. It'll mean that when everything does come back together, it'll all happen with a bit more speed and zest. But yeah, it's one of those things. But I have to be philosophical about it, because it's the way it is, and I want to do this car right. I could shunk it together and knock it out the door for a fraction, but that wouldn't be right to the next buyer, and it wouldn't be right to the car. One of the jobs I always like to do with every car that I buy is to put a new cabin filter into them, because invariably it's one of those things that just doesn't get changed, and it's, you know, it's nasty. It's what filters the air as it comes into the car. So I can understand why people don't do it. They're fiddly and tricky jobs. I mean, in order to do this, you have to take the glove box out. Now I took this panel out here accidentally, really. I thought this might have been the cabin filter. I was rummaging around looking for it. It wasn't until I had a proper dig that I found it there at the back. But that's just one screw to hold that in. So that's not a big deal. So now that I have accessed, the filter itself, I get to pull it out. See what we're dealing with here. Oh Christ! Ugh. Yeah, that's been a while. That's what this is. There's bits of leaves and all sorts of stuff in it. This is what it should look like. So yeah, that was overdue a change. So it's something I always like to do for that very reason. It's also a Fram. So this is an aftermarket one. So it's been changed before. And as I say, 2 of the retaining screws are missing, so that's how I knew it had been changed before. But it's been a while. But, you know, at least somebody cared enough to change it once. Just as a little interesting aside, if you think it's a faff in right-hand drive cars, on left-hand drive cars, you got to take the throttle pedal off to get access to it. No excuse, right-hand drivers, no excuse. Another slightly quirky job that I've been getting on with is replacing the dial lens. The original one had cracks on it for some reason. Well, I say for some reason, but having taken them out, taken it out and had a look at it, I can understand why it's cracked, because it's honestly, this whole instrument cluster is made of the flimsiest plastic I've ever encountered in my life. It is really, in fact, there's 2 little sort of tabs here that you screw the instruments to the dashboard with, and I've actually cracked one of mine taking it out, and I'm shocked that I did, because I'm not one for forcing stuff out. Really not made of strong stuff at all, so I'm going to have to nick one of these and graft it onto the original dials. But getting dials is not difficult, because they're of no use to anybody. Each individual dial cluster has to be programmed to the car, because it contains the car's mileage. So once you scrap a car, these are worthless. So I picked one of these up for 20 quid. You hear that crack? That's the little tab. I just literally swung it around, and this one is now cracked as well. Honestly, it is the shunkiest plastic. So the fact that the dial has broken is not surprising. It's really poor stuff. But anyway, I'll put the new one on. I've got a fresh one here from the replacement cluster. I'll just glue that on. I've prepared it. I'll glue it on and put it back in and not touch it again before the bloody thing explodes in my hands. Today is a bit of a wet one, and after the exertions of yesterday, I think I'm going to just undo the clutch, finish the dials, and that'll be it for today. I'm going to take a break. I'm waiting on a lot of parts anyway, so these are just sort of odd jobs I'm doing to fill the day, but I have other things I need to do, so I'm going to get on with it. So here's my clutch kit. That is your pressure plate, and that's the clutchy bit itself, and that sits in there like so. I also have my little clutch alignment tool. This is a very clever little thing, but I need to just do a little bit of prep work first, which is to give that a clean off with some brake disc cleaner, just to make sure that there's no residue on it. And then to get it out, it's just 6 10mm bolts. You just have to do them sort of in a sort of star pattern and gradually release the pressure on them. And then once you do that, it just comes off in your hands, and then to put it back in, it's the reverse. And you use this little thing which fits in there into the center of the pressure plate, and then the little, you can see the little teeth in there. again, that will bite the center of. So there's the clutch itself, and you can see the splines in the middle. So when you adjust that, that will bite the teeth of the splines and hold it in place. It just means that your clutch is centered when you apply the pressure brake. Because once you put that on and tighten it all up, you're done. Next thing, the gearbox goes on, and the only first time that you realize thereafter that you have a problem is when you're driving. So you don't want that to happen. So a universal one generally will do 99% of cars. So that's it. I'm going to get under the car because it's easier to access it. There's too many wires and whatnot up here at the top. It's too fussy up here. So it's much easier to access it from down below. So that's what I'm going to do. 6 bolts. Yes, bolts. And I'm done. So welcome to the process of removing the clutch from a Fiesta ST. The initial torque on these things is quite low. As I say, we're just going to work this in a heart pattern. Make sure I get them all. I'd much rather do this from above, but the access, because of all the cables and stuff, it's just impossible. That's it. Oops. So they're all loosened now. So I just need to remember the order I'm doing them in. The opposite, little fraction of a turn at a time. That's it. 6 of those, that's all that holds your clutch in. Most fast. This is the thing that drew me to cars in the first place, was just understanding how all these components can be made to work to make a car move, and yet in isolation any one of them is surprisingly small. Like none of the bits, like drive shafts for example, they're about the beefiest thing in the car, but then you see how they're held in place with little tiny circlips. It's insane. Alright, one more to do here. Now I've left the top one holding that in place because I'm going to go up and open that from the top. That way I can catch the clutch as it folds. That's it. Clutch out. Clutch actually fell out. There you go. Right. Old pressure plate off. Old clutch off. Now, here we get the new one in. So they have these little studs that we can mount this on, which is helpful. So we'll slide that up and onto these little studs. 1, 2, and 3. Those are they. But all they really need now is to be torqued up. And that will be that. But yeah, that's it. So the clutch is in, pretty much. Just need to undo my little tool here. Get that out. It's all nice and dead center. Beautiful. I've been trying to shoot this little clip for ages, but I can't because there's a huge murder of crows over in the trees over there. I keep making a racket, so if they interrupt me, I do apologize. Anyway, I'm going to put the replacement power or ABS module into the car because I don't need as much access down there anymore as I used to. I was trying to keep this area free so that I could put the power steering hose through, but because I have the subframe out, say hello subframe, I'm going to mount the power steering hose onto that as they would have done in the factory actually, and then just run it up when it's done. So I don't need to be rummaging around down there anymore. So because of that, I can get the ABS module in, and it'll be one more job done. And also,
it'll be, well, this is how it all started. Getting that ABS light off is the reason I got stuck into this car in the first place. So hopefully this is the solution to the first problem. But it'll be good to get it in nonetheless, and get another job done. It's been a very productive day. Getting this that'll be the last job of the day, and then get out of the weather and get away from the crows. It is just after 5 o'clock. I have been out here since 8 today, but the weather's held and I've had a long list of jobs to do, so I just kind of cracked on with it really. First thing I did today was I replaced my instrument lens. It had a big crack down the middle of it and it looked terrible, so now that's gone, but unfortunately the glue that I've used has started to frost up, which is not ideal. It's a case of 1 step forward, 2 steps back there, but I can't mess with it because those instruments are connected to the ECU because they store the mileage, so if I mess with it again and break them, then it'll be very expensive to replace them, so I'm just going to have to live with that one. The other job I've done is I have replaced my ECU module. It's all in, it's all buttoned down. It needs to be bled, obviously. There's a very cool system for doing that, but I was saving that for later because I wanted access, but because the subframe is off, all the power steering stuff that I need to put in can be bolted straight to the subframe, and I can bolt that in underneath, so that can go in. I don't need the access down there anymore. I've also got this whole area ready for, this is the battery tray plate that sits in there, and the battery tray sits on top of it. That whole area around it was quite rusty and crusty, so I've cleaned it all off, sanded it back, kind of sorted these earths out, sanded it back to bare metal, put new stainless steel bolts in, and then painted the whole lot up so it won't rust again in the future. Clutches in as well, obviously, and I've also finished servicing the car. I put plugs in it and I put an oil filter on it, but today I put the oil in, air filter and cabin filter. Happy with that. The other thing I did was I completely degreased my subframe while I was out. There was a lot of debris and gunk in there caused by the oil. The oil had covered this whole area when the gearbox had exploded, and of course everything then had stuck to it, so that's all nice and clean. And the last job that I did today was I refurbished my headlamps. I hadn't intended to do this today, but they had a horrible yellow gunk on them. They looked terrible. As they were out anyways, I thought, well, may as well do them today as the weather's holding, and here they are. And I'm really pleased with how they've come out. So that's my day, but it's now after 5 and I'm exhausted, and there's no more really that I can do now, so that's it, knocking it on the head. Good night.